Welcome back to Profiles in Excellence on Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here, and for segment 2, we've got 3 additional executives with us today to talk about some of their successful programs. With me on the second segment here are Charlie Armstrong, the Chief Information Officer, Customs and Border Protection, David DeVries, the Acting Principal Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Department of Defense, and Shishu Gupta, the Deputy Chief Information Officer of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We're talking profiles and excellence. We're talking about some things that you're proud of that you've accomplished over the last year or so. Let's start with Shishu here and talk a little bit. Tell us about a program or initiative that you feel has been a major success over at NGA, and perhaps talk a little bit about your role in it.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be back. As you know, NGA's had a couple of spots on your show in the past to talk about big data, cloud migrations, and things like that.
Absolutely.
We've talked some about the ODNI's initiative called EyeSight, Intelligence Community IT Environment.
Yeah, that's cool program too.
So it's a major cloud migration activity, and so NGA as a member of the community is really adopting a multi-pronged front to try to get into the cloud in a number of ways. We're doing work in services. I'm going to talk about something called the Geospatial Visualization Service. Basically, it's our back-end map services that we use to create a common services platform for anybody in the IC to be able to use. But just before I get into that, I want to mention briefly, we're doing some work in big data analytics, working with other members of the community to try to share data and try to really solve the big data problem and do a lot of shared analytics.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, if I thought about an agency that big data would be a big thing, it would be NGA.
Yeah, and actually we make a distinction between big data, which is lots of little bits of data, and large data, which is the really large files that we have. So when we talk about that, we have to make that distinction. We're doing a lot of work in the common desktop. We've talked about fielding a common desktop out to the entire IC and a major acquisition associated with that. So we're well on our way there. We're doing a lot of work in just exposing data. So this is a big part of the cultural side. We're actually declassifying data and putting it out on the open internet. We've got an Ebola website that we used that we partnered with Esri to create. And so we've got people from around the world accessing that open unclassified website, accessing data that used to be US government only. And lastly, we're even doing work in the software brokering model. Jim Klimovich talked about doing a lot more brokering. Here we're bringing software vendors into NGA in something called the Application Operations Service Provider model, which is effectively we have a contractor that acts as a broker to any new vendor that wants to come in. They bring their software, and we develop a pricing model, and then we sort of pay for use as we go. So that way we don't pay the full freight for
another as a service here.
So back to geospatial visualization services. On that one, the real challenge with that one was that we needed a way to get into the new commercial cloud service that was standing up inside the IC even before it went on. So we didn't want to wait until the cloud was in place before we started developing for it. So we really needed to create a development environment somewhere else. Luckily, we had Amazon services that we could use, so we were working in parallel on the unclassified side, creating a copy of our GVS program.
Remember when Amazon sold books?
Amazon sells books and plumbing supplies and oven parts, as I discovered, so lots of things like that. But they also sell cloud services, and so taking advantage of their unclassified cloud services really helped us get up to speed so that when they brought their new classified capability online, the very next day we were able to port that capability over. So we now have capabilities in the IC that this capability is essentially available to anybody in the IC.
Man, cool.
One day after IOC.
Man, that's a great story.
That's been an enormous success for us.
Good. And what are some lessons you learned along the way? Maybe some things you'd pass on to your colleagues as things that you encountered that maybe would be some advice for others that are trying to do something similar?
Some of them have already been talked about. You need buy-in from the top, and we've had really good buy-in from the Principal Deputy DNI, Stephanie O'Sullivan. She's really driving a weekly battle rhythm that is getting all of the agencies bought into the process and staying engaged, and that has really created a lot of momentum for the program. We've also partnered with DoD on a lot of that, so we have a very strong dialogue with Dave DeVries here to my left, and that partnership continues to grow stronger. So I think that early partnership is very important. We at NGA didn't focus enough on governance. That was mentioned earlier by Mr. Klimovich. I think we could do more there. Communication obviously is an important part of it. I think the one thing we haven't mentioned so far is that it'd be really, it was important for us to overcome a lot of the biases about the negative stereotypes about
Right.
what may or may not be possible in the cloud. So early success stories and use cases about what's possible in the run-up to the cloud would have been a lot more helpful
Right.
to get us to create the momentum earlier.
Right. One thing I get excited about this show is hearing people talk about how they're working with each other. It's funny, you know, we've had some shows that come on and people just talk, they're sitting at each other, talk about how they're coordinating things and so forth. And that's something you don't see, you know, day to day. You don't read about it in the trade journals and you don't hear about it in the newspapers. But there's some great stories around that kind of collaboration that's going on. David DeVries, how about over at Department of Defense? Tell us about some exciting things going on there.
There's quite a few exciting things. And so one of the things that's interesting being here on a show like this is the Department of Defense doesn't stand by itself. And you brought that up here several times. In the session before us, we had other folks that were heavily involved in some are components of and with inside DoD. But as Shishu pointed out here, we never really had a strong relationship with the IC side of the house. We started that in full vigor about 3 or 4 years ago. And what's the common denominator there is the cost of doing business and the cybersecurity or the security of our information and our ability to share it. And that pervades across all things. How do I share my information? 20 years ago, it may have been all my logistical data was just shared between those who ordered parts and put the parts on. The medical just stayed purely inside the medical side of the house. My transportation stuff just stayed inside the building and who was shipping it. Nowadays, we have to share that information across the board. And now we're looking at it from what's the cyber threat on that? And so one of the ways that we're looking at is how do I move quickly of knowing where my data is, how is it tagged, how is it stored, what's its progeny behind it, and then two, who do I need to share it with, and then how do I secure it? And it's not necessarily in that order because security's got to be the basis of the whole thing. Along comes technology. The big buzzword of the past few years is cloud. Go to the cloud. What's DoD? It's a few million people, a whole lot of organizations, a whole lot of this is how we've been doing it since, and you can put your own dates in there. And with that comes its own governance, its own culture, its own money, and it's hard to change any of that. So suddenly along comes new technology called cloud. If we just take 1,000 ways of doing business today and move it to 1,000 different clouds, all I have is more rain. I don't have more sunshine, I just have more rain.
I like that.
And so how do I get past that thing? So part of our struggle here within DoD, is if you look at it from a whole entity, is how do I put some management in there without stifling the innovation and capitalizing on what industry is bringing to us? It took us a while to get to come to grips with that. And really with the change of leadership this past summer and the innovative breakthroughs of how do I do the risk management, the whole risk management framework that changed under NIST and now adopted across the federal space, we're now making that into practical application of how do I apply that and how do I go about buying services. Along with that, companies are coming forth and saying, hey, cybersecurity is not just one of those things that the Department of Defense is worried about or that the federal is worried about. It's in our common business life too now. So how do we partner together on this thing? So suddenly now, everybody became concerned about cybersecurity, securing my data, and storing it and getting access to it. And coupled with that is the big data analytics that go with it. How can I learn what my total cost of return on investment is? Or what is the cost of this thing that I'm buying here and using here? So we've now done 5 large pilots that we're figuring out how do I bring our data, and it's probably the higher level security required data within the Department of Defense, using commercial vendors into what I would call the private cloud provided by them, hopefully off-premise, because I can then gain efficiencies if I can work with them on how do I secure it, how do I transport it, and if I have to, because the cost changes or somebody else comes up with a better one, how do I move it from vendor A to vendor B, because I'm not going to stay wedded to the same thing. And that's the same model that's being approached there by the community outside, and that's the neat thing. We now have the power of buying together, and ensuring that the security is baked into it from the very
Yeah,
beginning.
that's some great points there. The fact that you one of the first to bring up some of the drivers, cybersecurity being a driver, cost being a driver, but these interdependencies. I know back my days at Treasury, we once looked at how many other entities we're dependent on in order for our mission to be successful. And then when you get into cybersecurity, you realize it's the weakest link. Even if I'm doing everything I can, I'm going to be relying on a whole lot of others that I'm interconnected with to be doing what they're doing. So some great points there, and I like your cloud and rain thing. I guess you had to put up with a little rain in order to get to that rainbow right there.
But I think the key to success here, though, is understand the strategy, work with the industry out there, but then do something. And it took us a while to get going. I'll tell you, it took us a while to get going. But we had to do some things, make some mistakes, and then keep on going faster. And the other way we got to figure out how to do this thing is how to partner. Just as NGA found out is, once I get past the security of how do I acquire something and put it into something, all of us can't go through that same acquisition process to get it, because there's not enough time to do that. So we got to figure out how to get the vehicles together, work with industry to get the right price for the right commodity with the right security, and then let me piggyback and use those things together so we got effective buying power too on it.
Terrific. I love that. Yeah, if you're going to get to the top of the ladder, you got to first step on the first rung and get started. Charlie Armstrong, let's talk a little bit about Customs and Border Protection. Tell us about some cool stuff you're doing over there, Charlie.
Well, Jim, a couple of years ago, we were kind of under the looking glass from the IG and GAO on some of our level 1 programs. We had at least 2 of them on the watch list from OMB, and they were doing regular tech stats on them. And so, we got to a point where, hey, look, we just can't keep doing the same thing and expect that we're going to get a different result here. So we stepped back, and we had a lot of conversation throughout the community, throughout the department, and we made the decision that, from our software development to our provisioning to everything we do, we're going to move to agile development and Kanban, so more rapid, quick pace development efforts and provisioning and so forth.
No more of those big bang theories.
No longer the big monolithic bills that take years and either fail big or fail really big.
Or run over budget.
Right. So, we spent a fair amount of time retooling, retraining our program managers to understand Agile and how that, how we could move away from our old waterfall method and into an Agile environment. Also for our provisioning and for our services, moving to Kanban, which is very similar, but it's a methodology that allows us to do that kind of rapid provisioning, rapid service development. And so we struck out on a few pilots, and mainly in our cargo development area, and then our passenger processing. And throughout the year, we've been able to move from that old planning and requirements and long coding and testing cycles into this 2-week cycle of every 2 weeks. We're coming up with new story points and taking those from ideas to a product by the end of a 2-week cycle, and then bundling those together for regular releases. And it's been a real benefit. We've been able to have really good ongoing dialogue, not only with our frontline officers about the functionality that we're going to deliver, but also our key stakeholders, the department, OMB, the Hill, and really allowing them to see how we're moving along and that we've been able to deliver very much on track to what we promised. So we're not getting any more money. Money is that's the same. We still have to deliver the functionality that we agreed to years ago. I'm happy to say that we're well on our way to doing that. And we've really amped up the participation in a lot of our systems, because a lot of our systems not just used by government employees, but the trading community, the traveling public. So it's been a real success for us. One of the really key projects that we got to do this year with Agile development, I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of Ebola. And you might have heard that we had to implement an Ebola strategy at 5 of our major airports, literally over a weekend.
Wow.
And within the first week, we realized that the data that we were collecting, that our officers were collecting on paper to give to the CDC, there was going to be huge data entry problems with that data.
Sure.
Transcription errors, just all kinds of stuff. So literally within 3 days, because we recognized this on a Wednesday, and by Saturday, we were ready to deploy an application that pre-populated about 50% of the data that the CDC needed and allowed the officers to enter online the rest of the data and then transmit that right over to CDC so it could go directly into their system.
Wow, that's cool. See, most people don't see that. Again, you don't hear these stories, which is why I'm glad we do this show and have a chance to get these stories out there and people hear about some of the great work that's going on that are basically protecting the American public and, in the national security interest. And, Charlie, I used to tell people if you have no money, then it forces you to be more creative and innovative. And it really does. I mean, because you found ways to do things within the confines of tight budgets, and you're getting them done.
It definitely allows you to get past no.
And is there anything you'd pass on as a key lesson learned here?
We had to really partner with the acquisition community because not only did we have to change the system development processes, we had to change acquisition processes too. And along that lines, we had to shift our vendors to this methodology, and in some cases they came along for the ride, and some cases they didn't.
Yeah, so. There you go. Well, this was great. We heard a lot of things similar in this group that we heard in others. I did jot a few things here. We did hear from this group about those upfront drivers that, budget constraints. We heard from both David and Charlie. Budget constraints force you to do things differently, to look for new ways, innovative ways to get things done. We heard a lot about smaller, agile, being more dynamic and flexible, and no more big bang theories where we have a project that's going to take 8 years and we'll see what happens 8 years from now. I heard a little bit about partnering with the acquisition community as being a key issue that needs to be addressed up front. And I heard about retooling. You need to start. And if you've been doing the same thing for a long time, rather than continue to do the same thing, maybe it's time to step back, draw a vision, do some retooling, and start working your way into a new model or a new direction. Seems to me there might be a sports team in town here that might think about that too. I'm sorry. With that, we're going to move over to our third segment, but I want to thank our guests, Shishu, David, and Charlie, for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us and share their success stories. Clearly we're proud, and the American people are proud of the things you're doing for that. With that, we're going to take a short break. You're listening to Profiles in Excellence on the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.